Hi all, my name is Louise Aert. I'll take 1 second to try and alleviate the problem that is my last name. It doesn't look like that because there's an E there to confuse, but it's arts, like arts and science. I'd like to thank you for inviting me here as well. I've had the privilege of visiting and traveling in all 10 provinces in Canada, but I had yet to be to a territory. So I'm now 11 out of 13 and excited to continue my exploration of Canada. So I am the Registrar and Executive Director at the College of Midwives in British Columbia. I am not a midwife, although I think I could be one on TV. But as a regulator, I am then the one who walks softly and carries a large stick, I think. So what I thought I would do in terms of answering the question what it means to be regulated is look at what are the common traits of regulation across mainly any profession, but looking at healthcare in Canada. And so for all colleges, for all regulated, and I know we have a lot of nurses and doctors in the room, so this goes for the same for your professions and your registration process. Number one is to protect the public. Ensuring quality standards of care, registering qualified professionals, responding to complaints about the profession. That's the juicy parts. We need an enabling act or legislation of government in order to do so. Defining the scope, as we just talked about. Everyone maintains a register of the professionals. That's mainly done now through a public website where anyone from the public can then look and see who is a registered professional and who isn't. And if they've had any significant issues and complaints lodged about them where remediation has been required, that would all be displayed on that public register. All regulators are responsible for ensuring that there's liability insurance in place. That's part of protecting the registrant as well as the public. That there's an external appeal process in place that extends for both the complaints process and the registration process. So if someone is denied registration, that there is an ability to appeal through that. All regulators have, and all registered professionals have an annual registration. And so annually their registration expires and they're forced to renew. And this allows regulators to look at continued competencies and continuing education and what it takes so that they're not just registered and eligible on one day for the rest of their lives, but rather they have to maintain that. And finally, in Canada, we have our agreement on internal trade, which essentially is about reciprocity, which I'll talk to later. So how it looked in BC, in around 1990, we passed the Health Professions Act. We currently have 22 colleges in BC regulating 26 health professions. So there's a few colleges that have combined professions within it. In 1995 is when we got the Midwives regulation passed, which essentially established the college and the regulated profession of midwifery in BC. In 96, the college passed its first set of bylaws, which set out how registration would happen, what the conditions were for the first board, the administration of the college, meetings, the inquiry and discipline process, and the standards of practice. And by January 1st, 98, we registered our first midwives in BC. And currently we have around 250 practicing midwives and about 50 non-registered midwives at the moment. Just about to crack 300. I think we might be at 298. And then what that means for the college on an ongoing basis as a regulator is continually evolving standards, policies, guidelines, and programs. So it's really important to stay abreast of what's going on with the research, what the evidence is showing, making sure that we're evaluating safety and outcomes to ensure that what we are setting as the standards reflect what's happening in the communities, as well as protecting the public. We are continuously registering new midwives, so that's an ongoing process. People can apply at any time in the year. And then, as I said, annually we're re-registering and renewing registration. So don't call me at the end of March, as April 1st is our deadline and it's a busy time. We're looking at midwifery education program recognition. So we spoke to the education programs. So it's the college's responsibility then to evaluate the program and ensure that the program is meeting the basic competency requirements, that they're graduating midwives whom we feel are safe and ready to practice without supervision under general registration in the province. And for those programs that meet that, we recognize them. And then students who graduate from those programs are eligible to apply for registration. They also take a national exam, and in most jurisdictions, they'll take a jurisprudence exam for that particular jurisdiction. So just showing that they have the knowledge about practicing in that particular area. We manage inquiry and discipline, so that's the external complaints process, and complaints can come from anyone. The Act actually only defines in BC that the complaint be in writing. So it can come from the client, it can come from another midwife, another doctor, a nurse, it can come from the hospital as an entity, or the health authority as an entity. It can come from a mother of the client. It can come from any number of sources. And then we investigate through the college to determine if any of our standards, policies, bylaws have been violated, and what steps would be necessary in order to ensure that that person can practice safely. And then again, it's ensuring the standards and quality of care. So when I looked at this in terms of what it would look like to bring this into the UK, the things we need to consider and the uniquenesses are around what we've talked in terms of the model of care. It's a collaborative model. There's no question. Not all women have normal birth, and that's where midwives specialize. So it doesn't work without a collaborative process to be able to do those consults. As the doctor was saying, to be able to transfer to OB when things don't go as normal as expected. And so where you're going to need to have those consults in place, and also second attendance in the hospital and in home births. Consideration of the funding model, how would it look? This is something that varies across Canada, and we're going to talk about it this afternoon in our breakout sessions. But some jurisdictions use an employment model, others bill directly. In BC, we have our medical services plan, and midwives bill directly to MSP for their courses of care. In other provinces, they do that through their practices, and others, it's an employment model whereby they're employed by their hospital or health authority and paid a salary. We need to consider what are the benefits to maternal care and women in the UK. Interestingly, as I checked in, the woman at the front desk at the hotel was sharing that she'd had 3 children here in Whitehorse and had wanted to breastfeed for all and wasn't able to, and didn't feel that she had that support to be able to do it. And when she did feel there was some in place, it was by the 3rd birth, and she wasn't able to take all 3 kids out to go and get that. And so I just thought it was really interesting, like upon arriving here, hearing something where I really hear in BC as part of that covenant of the midwifery model is in the home visits, in the postpartum, and the breastfeeding support. And then I really would thought that we must consider, when Diane was talking about the scope, is the full expanded scope to maximize the effectiveness and the sustainability of midwives in a smaller environment. So in BC right now, midwives can work with someone from pregnancy through to 3 months postpartum. So not till you've peed on a stick and defined that you're pregnant, and then the minute you're that 3 months postpartum, that is the restricted scope. And so midwives have a lot more education and skills to be able to cover more, and we've talked about that in terms of well women care and well baby care for good examples. So when you look at regulation, you also have that whole concept of you're in or you're out. And so when you're looking at bringing regulation into an area that hasn't had it, you need to consider the midwives that are currently practicing. And I can say midwives here. In BC, I wouldn't because it's a restricted title. And so people who are practicing who are not registered would be referred to more as perhaps a birth attendant. But if they're using the word midwife, then that would be illegal because it is a restricted title and they would be performing illegal acts. And so you're going to want to look, understand that you do have some community midwives here. And so when I thought to your really good question, I think it's a real balancing act in terms of the numbers. But one of my thoughts was it is already happening here, and without the ability to regulate it or ensure any of the safety and standards. And so while I'm not discrediting any of those great points about the balance and the need for the family practitioner who has the full scope, it is something that you're already faced with, and to be able to then regulate and ensure safety for the women who are already making those choices as part of it. So how can we get support from the currently practicing? So you got to look for that buy-in, and then how to address illegal practice. So it starts with smaller measures like cease and desist letters, and it escalates all the way up to criminal proceedings. So in BC, prior to regulation, we had many practitioners practicing midwifery, and they were all invited to take part in a registration examination to determine competence, and then they went through a rigorous process with OSCEs and exams in order to be registered. And we have one famous birth attendant who refused to go through that process and be recognized by the system. And the college went through a very lengthy battle of getting the police involved, and then going through the courts to have a permanent injunction placed on this midwife who was experiencing a lot of press, a lot of bad outcomes, a lot of really difficult times. And she eventually served 5 months in jail for breaching the permanent injunction, and still practices in BC and trains midwives herself to become birth attendants. So it is an ongoing battle, but it is one where with the regulation we have some teeth and some abilities when we know about it and when we have witnesses who are able to work towards that. So small college considerations, so getting back to that numbers piece, is definitely having to look at the efficiency for size when you're looking at, we have a self-regulating college in BC with 300 registrants, so the midwives are able to fund the whole operations of the college. We receive a small grant from the Ministry of Health in BC, which is slowly being phased out. We are the second smallest college with 300 registrants in BC, the smallest being the podiatrists with 100, and astronomical registration fees as a result. But we're able to do that in a way that wouldn't be sustainable here. And so looking at other models like in the Northwest Territories where there is more of a government-imposed regulation model with midwives involved at the table. Okay, and then collaboration with other health colleges in the Yukon. As Sean was saying, with the nurses, they collaborate with other health professionals. You register through the southern colleges in order to practice up here. So you got to look for ways that we can collaborate, perhaps in the complaints process as well. And then also a look at the local situation and what you would require. We have in our bylaws an ability to have an Aboriginal class of midwives, which has not been struck to date. But in Ontario, they do have an Aboriginal class of midwifery. That's the end of that, so I open it to any questions.